Stephanie, this is Dr. Jester. I wanted to go over your monotheism paper, the theory of original monotheism as compared to evolutionary approaches. The intent of this entire essay is to help you to think about, first of all, monotheism as an approach, as a theoretical approach, and its originality. Was it original? Was it the first religious perspective? And then evolutionary approaches as a religious perspective. And of course, the scholarly argument is that it's a debate between the original monotheism, people saying that religious worshipers around the world originally were worshiping one God. And evolutionary individuals would say that monotheism is actually a later development, and that primitive religions, the worship of many gods, for example, are pantheistic, the worship of nature, God in nature, God as nature, that those were theories that originally started and that monotheism developed out of that. So there's this debate going back and forth, and the intent of your paper is to place those two side by side, evaluate the strengths of the original monotheistic theory, demonstrate its weaknesses. Then in evolutionary approaches, do the very same thing. Strengths of that approach, weaknesses of that approach. So as I'm going through your paper, first of all, I'm running onto several things there that I need to talk to you about. Initially, this is actually a couple of good thesis statements. I did change the wording around a little bit. You used some passive verbs. I changed that to a little bit more active. But you started out with this essay, and I changed that to this essay evaluates the theory of original monotheism and evolutionary differences. And it will show how far the religions have come from God's original plan in different religions. That's actually very good. What you need is in front of that, you need to say that there are various religious perspectives in the world. One theory is original monotheism. Another theory postulates that original spirituality was evolutionary theories. And then say, this essay evaluates the theory of, so you give it a little bit of an introduction before you actually state the thesis, but that's a great start. Now, as I'm going through this, I made a few changes along the way. One thing I want you to notice right here, I'm circling this, and let me see if I can actually bring that up just a little bit more. Hang on. Maybe. Go up just a little bit. Try that. There we go. All right, if you see that right there, you've got the period coming after the quotation. So with periods, they always go in front of the quotation mark. So you should have a period between the S and the quotation mark, just like I placed there just now. So that's one issue. Another issue you've got, in this first section here, you've got the extensive use of the word you. If you will read your style guide, and I please encourage you to do that. The style guide makes very strong emphasis that you shouldn't be using first or second person in academic writing. Avoid these at all costs. The only time you should use those if I tell you to use those, or if the nature of the assignment calls for just your personal opinion. That's the only time you should use it. Otherwise, you need to write in third person. I created a sentence here for you, substituting some of your personal first and second, so that it says a religion is anything that a person holds instead of you hold. A person holds dear to his or her heart and tries to make sure that the worshiper is happy. Okay? So made a few changes there. Again, I pointed out where those periods are placed in the incorrect way. Now, I really don't have any issues with the paper up until this point. You really do some decent discussion, and the content's great. But when we get down to the where you start discussing the strengths of original monotheism or evolutionary approaches, some of the material that you're placing in here really doesn't apply, and you're not giving enough information. And the quotations you're using do not really reinforce your argument. You're not making theoretical arguments based upon those theories. You're just throwing in some quotes. And the quote has to really apply to what you're talking about. So you're not providing anything there. So what is one of the strengths of original monotheism? One of the things you could have mentioned, your textbook author really talks about this. He says that one of the strengths, and I've encountered this in my work in Africa, that you see all kinds of religions that may not be practicing monotheists. They're polytheists. They believe in many gods, but nearly every religion I've encountered in most instances believes in a supreme deity that is over all, that's in the sky, that even is really far away, removed himself from humanity. He is upset with humankind, so removed himself. But they all seem to believe in it. You could have made an argument for that, but you really didn't. You made an argument from a quotation from Jonah that God made the sea. That really doesn't give a strength on the theory of original evolution or original monotheism. And then you kind of do the very same thing on strengths of the evolutionary approach. You have a quote from Young, Amos Young, that really doesn't directly deal with the strength of evolutionary approaches. You could have talked about some of that. And as a matter of fact, the entire paragraph is almost a quote from Young. So two things there. The quote doesn't really relate. And secondly, anytime you have a quote that large, it should be in block style. And if you'll read your style guide, it will tell you that it needs to be in block. And there's a specific form for block. It's indented. The entire quote is. There's no quotation marks around it. And it is single space, separated from the rest of the text. So you need to read your style guide. Familiarize yourself with that. Getting down to the weaknesses of original monotheism. Not really much here that reinforces weakness or discusses weakness. You don't really have anything there. You've got one quote, and it really doesn't relate to the theory. So what about what the textbook author says that you could have brought out, that one weakness in original monotheism is that there is no archaeological evidence to suggest there was ever, like a temple dedicated to the supreme God or an altar or anything that indicated that. So strengthening your arguments in the second half of that paper would have really helped. But we actually have a more concerning problem. Before I get down to this, weaknesses of the evolutionary approach. I've got to be honest with you here. This is like the weakness is personal preference. And you use the analogy of a discussion of people just basically doing what they want to do the way they want to do it. That really doesn't deal with the theory of evolutionary religious approaches. So it's not something that you're really actually responding to with solid analysis and content. But the bigger problem that we've got in all of this, I did a Turnitin analysis. Anytime I run into a lot of quotes in a document, I am required to do a Turnitin analysis and basically Turnitin. When I bring up your document, and you'll see here I'm in Turnitin. So when you submit it into the classroom, and then I go and look at it, which I'm required to do, if there are too many quotes in the document, it will automatically warn me of that number. And what I do is there is a filter over here. I select the filter, and then I go and say, turn the quotes filter off, meaning originally it won't check for quotes, but if there are too many, it will warn me. So then it wants me to look at the document. So that's exactly what I do. And I turn that filter off so it tells me the percentage of quotes that you have in a document. This number right here tells me that 34% of your document is not yours. It comes from your sources. You're quoting your sources. Well, I'm a firm believer in quoting your sources. You should, you need to, you must. You need to reference the sources. But when you do that too much, you're basically letting them make your argument. You're not making your argument anymore. They're doing it for you. So actually over a third of your document is the source making your argument. And you're the one that needs to make the argument and only use the source to reinforce it. Now, just like similarity, quotation percentages are not supposed to be above 20%. So what I typically do is if it's over 20%, I basically write a little note to the student, in your case, you, and just say, your quotation percentages are too high. Please watch those. When it's over 30%, though, I am supposed to require a revision, which I am going to have to do in this case. So I really want to help you. I pointed out some issues that will help you to do that. The first part of your essay is really great. The last part, you're letting your sources make an argument, and some of those really don't apply to what the issue needs to be discussing. So I'm going to allow you to revise this, but you need to cut down on the quotes. There are several ways to do that. One is just don't quote as much. Another is if you think you must use that quotation, that it's appropriate to what you want to make as an argument, then you need to summarize it or not quote as much of it so that you cut down on the percentages of the quote. It's real easy just to say that this person says this. Use your own words to describe what their idea is. Still give them credit for the idea, but then you use your own words to describe their idea. So you can do that. You need to get this much closer to 20% as a percentage of your whole document. So I'm going to revise this to you, and then you'll need to resubmit that in both Turnitin and the assignment Dropbox, okay? If you have any questions, I will be posting this same information to the individual forum. You can respond to me there, but if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll be happy to talk to you about those, okay? Blessings on you.